Alright everyone, so I'm going to work on the arm now using what's called an FKIK switch. Now I'm using Maya 2011, and in 2011 there's one way to do it, but since 2012 it seems that way doesn't work so well anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the way that works in 2012 and beyond, because it's far simpler. It takes a fraction of the time, really. It's more or less the same result. It's just a little bit less work. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do the left arm, and you'll basically do a mirror just like we did on the legs, and you'll be able to do the rest. But you'll want to do the mirror after the hand is done as well, and that'll be done in the next video after this. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and start. Now, what I'm going to do first is go ahead and create a clavicle joint, and if you check out his geometry here, you can see this clavicle is going to go right along here. Placement of this is somewhat important because if you just rotated the arm like up or down from the shoulder, what would happen is you're very limited as to how high you could actually go. It just doesn't look as natural. Adding into it the ability to bend from another pivot point, basically where your clavicle is, it extends the reach of how much you can go. So what I like to do is just in my front view, I just create a single joint, and what you can do is also snap this to the surface, right onto the vertice. So I'm thinking, this is normally where I would put it, but I'm thinking right down here might be a little bit better in this case. It might give us a better ability to pivot from here. So I'm just holding down V, and I'll snap onto that vertice, and there it is. Now, what I do then is I just take it in my side view and move it back into the model. So you can see, if I turn off X-ray, you can see that it's actually inside. Now this doesn't really affect it too much, but again, you're setting a place for this to rotate from, so we don't want it to be really outside here. It's going to be a little bit closer to your shoulder. So I leave that one alone for now. I'll go ahead and name it though. This will be BNJNT L clavicle. And I'll just leave that one alone after this for a little while. Okay. And my top view is not showing everything, so I got to bring up the view cube real quick. If you ever have this issue, obviously I can't see everything. You just bring up the view cube and hit that little house thing on there, and there you go. Resets the viewport. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and start working on his arm. And the arm, in a very basic sense, is made up of 3 joints. I'm going to be creating 4 here. One will be used a little bit later. But let me see. I'm just trying to eyeball where I should place everything, because I got to think about where his shoulder is going to be, where his elbow is going to be, and his wrist. And thankfully, his arm is very straight. Sometimes you'll find him at kind of an angle downward, or even further than that, where instead of T-pose like this, you'll get what's called an A-pose, where the arm is almost at a 45-degree angle downward from this. So it does happen. I find it much easier to rig in T-pose. It's the reason why they do A-pose sometimes is because it's a more relaxed position. It's not uncommon to see either of those, though. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into my top view and create the joints for his shoulder. Now, I'm noticing that there's a pretty decent edge loop right here for his shoulder. If I follow that around, I'll see that it goes right to about here. And that should work pretty well. I might even go to this one right here. Right about here, this intersection. Alright, so I might go about right there, I think. And then the elbow, I can't really see from this vantage point, but I will be able to see it quite easily from the top. So I think I'm going to line up with this. Alright, so from right there, I'm going to go to his elbow and then to his wrist. So I'll go ahead and start this. Now, I'm looking at the edge loops and I see that there are some that are pretty decently arranged right down the center. I'm probably going to start right back here, I think. That looks like a good position. So I'll go right about here maybe. And that'll be his shoulder joint. Now, you can see he's got a lot of edge loops right here for the elbow. And based on what I can see from the top view, it looks to me like I think this one is probably going to be the best. It'll probably bend pretty easily there. So I'll go ahead and click right about there. Actually, I'm going to follow this edge loop right here because that leads up to the center of his hand pretty much. So that'll be where his elbow pivots from, and then I'll go to his wrist. Now I don't want to go to this one right here. I'm going to go one back to about right here, center it just a little bit better, and that'll be his wrist. But I want to hold down shift and create one more joint. And I want this to be in a perfect straight line because this is, I like the axis that it's got right now for the wrist joint, so I'm going to keep it that way by holding down shift, and that'll create the axis that the wrist will rotate on. So I'm going to create this kind of in the center of the hand. This joint right here is going to be used later as a root for all of the fingers. So you just want to place it in the center of the hand. It's really not going to manipulate anything. You can't really move the center of your hand on its own, obviously, so it'll just sit there. So go ahead and hit enter, and if you're like me and the size of the joints is bothering you, you can go ahead and change them. I don't remember what the last one was that I used. Maybe just one. Alright, that's good. Now, I drew these in the top view, which means right now these are sitting on the floor. So we just got to move these up. So I'll go into my front view, grab the shoulder joint, and pull it up so that it is inside the arm. And there's a decent edge loop in here that works pretty well. Hopefully I can grab this right here. Kind of line it up with that, and that should work pretty well. And I'm close enough, so I'm happy. I like to leave the joints as straight as possible, in this viewport at least, because that way it eliminates any random rotations with stuff we're going to do in a little bit. So in here, obviously I want the angle because I want the elbow to know which direction it's going to rotate it. So I can just leave this the way it is right now, because I'm going to be doing the simpler setup here, where it's a single joint chain. This should work just fine. I don't really need to do anything else. In the past, you would see me making 3 different joint chains. Well, with the new setup, I don't really need to do it. This setup has actually been around for a while. I just found that it didn't work as good as it should in previous versions of Maya. Nowadays, it works really, really well, and it's a lot simpler, like I said. So I'll go ahead and name these really quick. And if you've been through the class recently, you know that I used to do the 3 chains, like I said, and I would name them all individually, but nowadays it just doesn't seem like I need to do that. So this will actually be the first time I've recorded this, so my naming, I've never really named this setup before, so I'll just call this just straight up L shoulder, I guess. And elbow, wrist, and hand root. So ENJNT. Elbow. Excuse me, I think I have a cold today, so I may sniffle a lot. And this will be hand root 01. And that should be enough right there. So, everything's in place now. That's good. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and create an IK handle. And I do want to make sure it's an RP handle, which is good. I don't know what that is, but I'll ignore it. And I'm going to go ahead and create my IK handle from the shoulder to the wrist, not to the hand root. Make sure you don't do that. Alright, we just want it to bend at the elbow, and that's basically it. So there's our IK handle. Again, you just click on the shoulder, click on the wrist, done. This will be IKL arm. Now, basically what I like to do now is just create all the controls I'm going to need, and then we'll set them all up on an individual basis. So I'm just going to leave everything how it is for now and just create some controls. And again, you guys should have access to my script right now for the combined curves. So if you want to use that to make some of these controllers, by all means, I prefer creativity in the controls. So, but in this video, I'm just going to create some circles for this because that should basically get me almost everything that I need. So I'll create one circle and snap it to the wrist. And I'm going to rotate it and shrink it down. Okay, that's good. And I'll freeze transformations and delete history on it because I like where it's placed. This will be CC underscore L IK wrist. We're going to have 2 different setups going on this same joint chain. So we need to differentiate the controls. Okay, so there's my IK wrist. I'm also going to need a locator. And this is going to be pretty much like what we did on the leg. I'm going to take that locator and snap it to the elbow and move it back. And what I'm looking for here, and I went way too far there. What I'm looking for is that when I bend the arm, that the IK, or the pole vector control, is well beyond where the elbow is. So that it doesn't flip over it, really. So that's good positioning right there. I can change the size of this locator because it's ridiculously large. The ones from before, I changed their local scale to 0.005. So there you go. Now positioning-wise, it's good. So I'll freeze transformations and delete history. This will be CCL IK ARM PV01. So it's the left IK controller for the ARM pole vector. We'll probably see something somewhat similar. I didn't call it the IK leg pole vector, but it's the same thing. I just wanted to differentiate it from the FK controls that we're about to do. Now, IK controls, you basically move stuff. It just involves an IK handle, and you have the ability to move things. So that's all translation. In terms of FK, it's all rotation. So I'm going to create another circle, snap it to the shoulder, just make sure it's right on the money, rotate it, and scale it down to what I'm looking for. And I'll freeze transformations and delete history. And I'm going to duplicate that by hitting Control D, and snap this one to the elbow, and scale it down a little bit. Freeze transformations, duplicate it one more time, and snap it to the wrist. And I want to create a differentiation between these two controllers, just so you know, in this video I know the difference between them. The larger one is going to be the FK controller in this case. The smaller one will be the IK. Now in normal situations I would have them be the exact same shape, but just so you can see the difference right now, that's what I'm going to do. Alright, so let's name these. The big one will be CCL FK shoulder, and then I'll basically do the same for the others. L FK elbow, and this will be L FK wrist. Alrighty, so these are pretty much ready to be set up. I just got to do some various constraints and parenting, and then pretty much everything will work almost from that. Actually, I do need one more controller. I need an FKIK switch, and this will allow us to switch back and forth between the two setups. So I'll just create another circle, brand new one, and I'm going to snap it to the wrist joint and move it up. How far you move it up is kind of a personal preference here, but I'm actually going to do one other thing. I'm going to add some more sections to this, because I'm going to make kind of a star shape out of this, which you've seen me do kind of in a previous video for the hip, but I didn't have enough sections for it. So just going to grab every other CV on this circle and scale it in. So that gives me just kind of a unique shape. Now, I'll be honest, I would normally use something like, I would actually use the text curves and use my combine curves script to make something a lot nicer than this, but this is okay for now. So freeze transformations, delete history, and I need to add an attribute to this, and this is really important for this setup. So with that shape selected, actually let me name it first. This is going to be CCL FKIK 01. Alright, and I'll add an attribute to this. You can, again, with it selected, go to Edit, Add Attribute, or go up to Modify, Add Attribute. So, I'll add it. I'm going to call this FKIK. And I want to make the minimum 0, and the maximum 1, and the default 0. And there's good reason for this, trust me. Normally I would do it where this was like a 0 to 10, but in this case I'm just going to go 0 to 1. So I'll add that. There we go. Now we're going to set that up in just a minute. We have to basically set up everything else first, and then we can go from there and just kind of connect everything together. Okay. So I'll set up all these controls first so that they work. The first thing I want to do is I'll go ahead and set up the IK controls, which is fairly simple. I'm going to take the IK handle and parent it to the IK wrist controller. So just select the IK, select that circle, and hit P. And then you can see that this now will move that. We got a couple other things to do, obviously, to set this up. But then I'm going to go ahead and add the pole vector. So grab that locator and the IK, constrain, pole vector. And now you'll see I can move it. Yay. One other thing we need to do for the IK is we need to make it so that when we rotate this, it rotates the wrist. So you just select the wrist controller and the wrist joint. And we're going to do an orient constraint. So now you can see, yay, it works. Now, we got to do the same thing as that, but for the FK controllers. So it's just as simple as creating an orient constraint again. So I'm going to take this one and apply it to the shoulder, orient constraint. The elbow FK controller, the elbow joint, orient constraint. And the FK wrist and the wrist joint, orient constraint. So we should see right now that these probably won't do too much. That one's going to work, but that's just rotating the wrist, so we should be okay with that though. But these do nothing right now, and that's because on the IK handle, there's this thing that's called the IK blend. Now we're going to have to set some stuff up so that this all works, like, for instance, the rotation on the joint. We're going to have to make it so that only one of those controllers can control it at a time. But we're just going to connect a lot of stuff together so that that happens automatically. But right now, pretty much everything is working, but it's all based on this IK blend. Right now, because it's set to 1, this arm will be allowed to be controlled by the IK controls. So I can move this, and you can see that the joints are moving. But if I use the FK controllers, those do nothing. Now, the reason why the wrist moves is because technically it's not part of the IK chain. It's a little harder to explain, but we'll make it so that only one works at a time. But if I take the IK blend and put it to 0, and again try and move the IK, you can see that nothing's happening. Well, now if I grab the FK controller, you can see it's working. So we're going to be creating just a little setup for a switch that makes that automatically happen. Now there's one other thing I need to do real quick. It's with the FK controllers. I just need to parent them to each other basically so that they all move at the same time. So the FK wrist gets parented to the FK elbow. Just hit P. Then the elbow gets parented to the shoulder. That way, if I rotate the shoulder, everything goes with it, and when I rotate the elbow, the wrist goes with it. So we're pretty much all set to set everything else up. All I have to do is connect to that IK blend and the visibilities of certain things and just some other stuff together. So what I'm going to do first is grab the FKIK control, and I'm going to open up my connection editor. So there's our FKIK attribute, and I want to connect this to the IK blend on the handle. So I'll grab the IK handle and load it onto the right, and I'll connect FKIK to IK blend. So you can see that as I switch this now, it will automatically switch the IK blend as well, which is great. So basically at 0, it's going to be FK. So right now it should be 0, therefore it's working. And if I grab the IK handle, it doesn't work, which is exactly what I'm expecting here. But we will have to fix that little thing right there. That's simple though. What I think would be best is just a set-driven key for that. So we're pretty much going to be doing set-driven keys for the rest of this though, because right now the controls all work, but they're all visible, and we don't want that. We want to hide them. When it's FK, we don't want to see the IK controls, and when it's IK, we don't want to see the FK controls. So I'm just going to do a basic set-driven key in this case. So my driver will be this, and the visibilities will be driven by that. So I'll start by grabbing the IK controls for now. And the only reason I'm doing that right now is because it's FK. So I will grab the wrist IK controller, and I'm going to go to set driven key. And there it is at the bottom. Automatically loads into the driven. So now my driver will be the FKIK control. So I'll load that in, and basically I want to set it so that when it's 0 on the FKIK controller, the visibility of the IK controls is not on. So I'll select everything. Actually, let me turn off the visibility first, and then select it, and now I've got my key ready. I'm going to go ahead and hit it, and there we go. I'll switch this over to 1, and now I want to swap the visibility back on. So there it goes. Okay, so now if I switch to FK, the IK controls disappear. Switch it back to IK, and boom, there they are. Okay? And you can even see that there's a color change in there too, which is kind of cool. I never really noticed that before. So I guess green means FK, and brown means IK in this case. So that's cool. Now, that's one IK controller. We've also got the locator, which is our pole vector, so I want to set that up with the same thing. So right now, it's set to IK, so I will go ahead and key it, because it's on. There's our first key. Switch it off, and turn the visibility off. And I'm sorry if you can hear the background noise, but it is storming really, really bad right now. So I apologize if you can hear that. So there we go. Back and forth, you can see it's switching on and off, which is great. Okay? So I got to do the same thing to the FK controls. Currently I'm set to 0, meaning FK in this case. So I'm just going to grab the shoulder FK controller and load it into the driven. And right now everything is set up exactly how I need it. It's set to FK, the FK controllers are on, so hit key. I will swap this onto IK, and I will turn the visibility off and hit key again. So now you can see that as I switch back and forth, I get exactly what I need. So one more thing that we have to do here is just make it so that the orient constraint on the wrist, which has 2 weights on it, we need to make sure that it switches as well. We don't want both of the wrist controllers to work at all times. So that's yet another set-driven key, fairly simple. I'm going to load the orient constraint. Let me see something. No, I didn't get it. You're going to have to grab the orient constraint from the outliner. And it's right there. You go to the wrist joint, and you'll find the little exclamation point parented underneath it. Just check out the name. It's got the same name as the joint itself, and then just orient constraint added to it. So there it is. You can see we have 2 weights on it. One is from the IK controller, one is from the FK. So we just got to switch them on and off when we need them. So I'll load that into the driven, and there they are. So let's see. Currently it's set to 1, meaning it's IK. So I'll go over here, and I will turn off FK, 0 being off, of course. And I'll key these weights. So there you go, they turn red. And I will switch the FKIK back to FK, which is 0. And I will go ahead and swap these. And I'm thinking of a better way to do this right now, but it's okay. This way works just as well. And is pretty much just as easy. So, if I go to the wrist now, you can see that it is rotating properly. Oops, excuse me. There you go. Good. Now, I want you to see what happens when we switch in between. So I'm going to rotate the shoulder and the elbow, and I guess the wrist too, why not? Just so you can see the whole change between everything. So, everything's bent. Now, if I switch over to IK slowly as I can, you'll see that everything moves over there, and it matches what the IK controllers are. Okay? And pretty much at this point, your FKIK switch is now done. This makes it a lot quicker. This is something that I recently found out does work. So I will be teaching this way in class from now on. It's a lot quicker. Normally this was like a 3-hour lesson. This will cut it down tremendously in terms of time. There's just a couple more things we got to do in terms of cleanup of the scene. First things first, I want this FKIK switch to follow the arm at all times. I don't want it to be hanging out back here. So what I do is basically just grab the wrist and then grab the FKIK controller. And so it's kind of a reverse this time. I'm selecting the joint first, then the controller. And I'm going to do a parent constraint. And I want maintain offset on. So there it is. Now, the reason why I selected the joint first is because this is never going to be moved or rotated by the animator. The only thing they'll ever see in the end of it is this one attribute on here. So, and depending on how we do the hands, frankly, you'll probably find the hand controls on there as well. But now you can see that as I rotate the arm, that follows with it wherever it goes. And even if I switch to IK, you can see it moves over there, which is fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and leave that on IK for now. And pretty much it's all set up. The arm now works. There's just a couple steps we need to do to make everything finalized. For instance, I need to take the shoulder and parent it to the clavicle now. So grab your shoulder joint, then grab the clavicle and hit P, and then take the clavicle, and I think this is D? No, it's spine C. I like to choose the one that's at the center of the chest, like straight through the diaphragm, because I find you get better results by having the arms attached to this as opposed to the one up here, which is slightly more anatomically correct, only slightly. It's hard to explain without really looking at a skeleton or showing you in person what I mean, but again, I'm just going to take the clavicle and this joint right here. Now, in my case, it's spine C. In your case, it may be something different. You just got to kind of, if you look at the front view, it's going straight through the center of the chest. That's what I'm looking for, like through your sternum. All right? And I'll parent it to that. So we're on the right track. If I rotate this right now, you'll see that the joints move, but I really want the controllers to move with it. And that's a pretty easy task, actually. We just have to create a group that I call the back buffer. I just never came up with a better name for it. But basically what I want to do is take all the arm controls. We're actually going to have one more that I'm going to create first, and then we'll create the back buffer. I know I'm kind of going scattered a little bit here, but there's a lot of ways you can do this in different orders, I mean. So I'm just going to go ahead and create this first. I'll show you what I like to make for the clavicle control. You don't have to do this, obviously, but this is just what I like to use. So I'm just going to grab my EP curve tool, set it to linear, and I'm going to go into the top view real quick. What I like to do for this is just hold down X and start snapping to the surface. And I'm going to make a long rectangle, basically, and come back around. And I'm creating a CV at every grid point for good reason. You'll see it in just a second once I complete it. So there's my rectangle. Just want to center the pivot. Really invalid argument. Interesting. I don't know why that had an error. I've never seen that before. So there's my rectangle. What I want to do with this is use a deformer on it called a bend deformer, and it does exactly what it sounds like it does. Just go to Create Deformer, Nonlinear, Bend, and Create Deformers is under your animation menu set. So create a bend, and I already know this isn't going to work right off the bat. I need to rotate it. So first I'm going to rotate it 90 and X. And I'll show you what this can do, but I know this still isn't the right direction. So under the bend input, you can just grab curvature and you can see it's bending it. Ooh, yay. But I know that what I'm looking for is a little bit different. I just want to rotate it 90 degrees in Z as well and get something like that. Not really sure what to call this. It's kind of like a horseshoe, I guess, but not exactly. So that's good enough for me. And I'll just delete the history. That removes the bend. And I'll center its pivot again. This thing's going to be quite large at the start, but I'm going to end up scaling it down. So I will snap this to the shoulder, and it's absolutely enormous. So, or snap it to the clavicle, I should say. I'm going to keep scaling it down in different axes, and I guess that's okay for the size. What I'm going to do basically now is just take the CVs and move them around, and that leaves the pivot where it is. I'm just editing the shape of it now. And I'll rotate them a little bit and just do something like that. It should be good enough. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay. So I'll go back to object mode, and you'll see the pivot is still on the clavicle. If it's not, just DV snap it back, and that'll put it there. So I'm happy with where this is now. The pivot is again on the clavicle joint. I'll freeze transformation and delete history. And I will name this CCL clavicle 01. And in order to make this work, I'm just going to select the controller and then the clavicle joint and parent constraint. Maintain offset is on, and there we go. So now I can both move and rotate this. And this is really for small adjustments. You're never going to use it that much, but it's really, really useful. So now that our arm is basically done, now I got to make the back buffer. That'll allow it to basically have everything move when I rotate this spine joint right here. So what I want to do, just select nothing and hit Control G. We did that on the foot many, many times, actually. So I'm going to take that group that gets created. I'll rename it GRP back buffer 01. And what I'm going to do is DV snap this. Again, Delta Victor. DV, hold down your middle mouse button and just move it ever so slightly. Because this is an empty group, it really is just a pivot point. There's no visible shape to this. So by holding down DV and snapping it to that point, I get no translates because I'm really just moving the pivot, which is just it saves you about a second a time. So I got my back buffer in the spot that I want it, and what I'm going to do is take all the arm controls. Now we have just the left side right now, but we're going to have a right side eventually. They would go in there as well. So I'm going to take the IK wrist, the pole vector, the shoulder, which has the elbow and wrist underneath it for the FK, the FKIK switch, and the clavicle. All these objects, they just get parented directly into the back buffer. Okay? And the only other thing I need to do is I'm going to take the spine C joint, the one that I snapped it to. I'm going to select the joint, then select the back buffer group. I want the back buffer group to follow with everything. So I'm just going to constrain it to that joint, and I'm going to use a parent constraint. I know maintain offset is on. So now I'll rotate that spine, and you'll see that the arm controls go with it, which is exactly what I want. And the only other thing I need to do to make all this work, I mean, I can already see that that works, but I'm going to take my back buffer group and parent it under the local control. Okay, so now when I move the local, the entire arm goes with it. And granted, it did before. This just kind of keeps it in with all the rest of the controls. So there's spine C again. I can rotate that, and you can see that the arm goes with it. And then I can grab this and rotate. Oops, sorry. And then I can switch over to FK if I need to. And you can see you can transition between the two. So our arm is now complete. And from there we can go on and move and make the hand, and then you want to mirror it over from there. Now that we only have one joint chain, it would make the mirroring process a lot simpler. Everything should work out a lot better. So that's how you do an FKIK switch, at least in the newer version. This is kind of just going with what Maya has within it already. As I said before, the IK blend didn't used to work as well. It just seems like it works fantastic now. And we don't have to worry about creating 3 chains and spending really 3 hours just going over this. This is going to make it a lot simpler. So next up, we will work on the hand, and from there we'll finish it off by doing blend shapes and a couple other things. So until next time.